The invitation to die. Jack Sullivan wiped the sweat from his forehead as he finished cleaning the last of the meat hooks in his small butcher shop. The Texas heat had been brutal all day, and the ancient air conditioning unit was fighting a losing battle against the summer sun. At 38 years old, Jack had spent the better part of his life learning the art of meat preparation from his grandfather, but business had been slow lately. The big chain stores were stealing customers, and Jack wondered how much longer he could keep Sullivan's quality meats afloat. The bell above his shop door chimed, and Jack looked up to see 3 figures entering his store. They were tall, impossibly elegant, and dressed in flowing robes that seemed to shimmer in the fluorescent lighting. Their skin had a pale, almost translucent quality, and their eyes were larger than any humans should be. Jack had seen enough science fiction movies to recognize aliens when he saw them, but his practical mind immediately went to his first concern. "We're about to close," Jack said, gesturing to the nearly empty display cases. "But I've got some nice ribeye steaks in the back if you're interested." The lead figure stepped forward with fluid grace. When it spoke, its voice had an odd musical quality that seemed to resonate in Jack's chest. "Greetings, Jack Sullivan. I am Ambassador Thelan of the Vorthok Collective. We have traveled far to meet you." Jack set down his cleaning cloth and studied his unusual visitors. "Traveled far, huh? Well, I appreciate the business, but I'm not sure what I can offer beings from another planet. I specialize in Earth animals." The second alien stepped forward, consulting what appeared to be a glowing tablet. "Our research indicates you are among the finest meat preparers on your planet. Your techniques with blade work and seasoning are exceptional." "Seasoning?" Jack raised an eyebrow. "You folks know about seasoning." "We know enough to recognize mastery when we encounter it," Ambassador Thalanara replied smoothly. "We have come with an invitation. Our people would be honored to host you at our most sacred celebration, the Festival of Gratitude." Jack leaned against his counter, intrigued despite himself. After months of declining sales and mounting bills, the idea of customers who appreciated his craft was appealing. "What kind of festival are we talking about here?" "A grand feast," the third alien said, its eyes gleaming with what Jack mistook for enthusiasm. "You would be our guest of honor, the centerpiece of our celebration." "Centerpiece?" Jack scratched his chin thoughtfully. "You mean like a celebrity chef kind of thing?" "In a manner of speaking," Ambassador Thelanara said carefully. "You would be the focus of our entire gathering. Thousands would witness your contribution to our culture." Jack's business instincts kicked in. This sounded like the kind of opportunity that could change everything. International recognition, or, in this case, intergalactic recognition, could put his little shop on the map. "What would you need me to bring?" "Your finest equipment," the ambassador replied. "Your blades, your seasonings, anything you believe would enhance the experience." Jack nodded slowly. His grandfather's knife set was still the best he'd ever used, and his spice collection was legendary among local barbecue enthusiasts. How long would this festival last? "One glorious day," the second alien said, though the preparation time would be somewhat extensive. "Preparation time?" Jack asked. "To ensure optimal freshness," Ambassador Thelanara explained. "We have very specific requirements for our traditional feast." Jack made his decision. What did he have to lose? His shop was barely breaking even. His wife had left him 2 years ago, and he hadn't had a real adventure since his army days. "All right, I'm in. When do we leave?" The aliens exchanged glances that Jack couldn't quite read. "Immediately, if you are prepared." Jack looked around his shop one more time. He could arrange for his neighbor to watch the place for a few days. Give me an hour to pack my gear. 60 minutes later, Jack stood outside his shop with 2 large cases containing his grandfather's knife collection, his prize-winning spice blends, and his portable meat grinder. The aliens had produced a vehicle that looked more like a work of art than transportation, all smooth curves and impossible angles that hurt to look at directly. Impressive ride, Jack commented as they loaded his equipment. Must get terrible. Gas mileage. Gas is not required, the ambassador replied. We use more efficient energy sources. The interior of the craft was even stranger than the outside. The seats seemed to mold themselves to Jack's body, and the walls displayed moving images of starfields that made him slightly nauseous. As they lifted off, Jack caught a glimpse of his neighborhood shrinking below and felt a momentary pang of uncertainty. So tell me about your people, Jack said, trying to make conversation as Earth disappeared behind them. What's your food? Culture like? The aliens exchanged those unreadable glances again. Traditional, the second alien replied. Very traditional. We have maintained the same dietary practices for millennia. Traditional can be good, Jack said diplomatically. But there's always room for innovation. That's what keeps cuisine alive. Innovation, Ambassador Thelanara repeated slowly, as if tasting the word. Yes, we are very interested in your innovations. The journey to Vorthok took 3 days, during which Jack learned remarkably little about his hosts. They were polite but evasive, answering his questions about their culture with vague responses about tradition and ritual. Jack spent most of the time planning menus and wondering what kind of ingredients would be available on an alien world. When they finally arrived at Vorthok, Jack pressed his face to the viewing portal and whistled softly. The planet looked like something from a Gothic nightmare. Dark spires reached toward a sky the color of dried blood, and the architecture seemed designed by someone who thought welcoming was a foreign concept. Everything was built from black stone that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Charming place, Jack said, though he was beginning to have second thoughts. Very atmospheric. The landing platform was surrounded by hundreds of Vorthok citizens, all wearing the same flowing robes as his escorts. They stood in perfect silence, watching the ship with an intensity that made Jack's skin crawl. When the doors opened and Jack emerged with his equipment, a sound went through the crowd that might have been applause, but sounded more like hungry growling. Popular guy, Jack muttered, waving awkwardly at the crowd. Ambassador Thelanara led him through streets that seemed designed to make visitors feel small and insignificant. Every building loomed overhead like a disapproving parent, and a few windows Jack could see were dark and lifeless. The citizens they passed stopped whatever they were doing to stare at Jack with expressions he couldn't quite identify. Your people seem really excited about the festival, Jack observed. They have been anticipating this day for months, the ambassador replied. Many have traveled great distances to witness the ceremony. They arrived at what Jack assumed was the festival venue, a massive structure that looked like a cross between a cathedral and a slaughterhouse. The main hall was enormous, with a ceiling that disappeared into shadows above. At the center stood what appeared to be an altar made from the same black stone as everything else, surrounded by cooking equipment that looked both primitive and somehow menacing. Asterisk. This is where the ceremony will take place, Ambassador Thelanara announced. Jack surveyed the setup with a professional eye. The equipment was crude by his standards, but functional. Large fire pits, various cutting surfaces, and what appeared to be restraining devices for holding large cuts of meat. Interesting setup. Where do you usually source your protein? We import only the finest specimens, the second alien replied. Carefully selected for quality and flavor. Import from where? Jack asked, but before anyone could answer, a new figure entered the hall. This Vorthok was different from the others. Larger, more muscular, with scars crisscrossing its pale skin and eyes that held a predatory gleam. It wore a leather apron stained with substances Jack preferred not to identify, and carried what appeared to be a cleaver the size of a small sword. "This is Chief Executioner Kazrak," Ambassador Thelanara said with obvious reverence. "He will oversee the preparation process." Jack extended his hand in greeting, but Kazrak ignored it, instead circling Jack like a predator evaluating prey. The Tbot alien's eyes lingered on Jack's arms and torso with an intensity that made him deeply uncomfortable. "Adequate marbling," Kazrak said finally, his voice like grinding stone. "Stress levels appear manageable. This specimen should provide suitable sustenance." Specimen. Jack's blood went cold as pieces of the puzzle began falling into place. The careful selection process, the comments about freshness and preparation. Time, the way everyone was looking at him like he was walking around naked. "There seems to be some confusion," Ambassador Thelanara said smoothly. "Perhaps we should explain the true nature of our festival of gratitude." Jack took a step backward, his hand instinctively reaching for the knife at his belt. "I think I'm starting to get the picture. The Festival of Gratitude is our most sacred tradition," the ambassador continued. "Once each cycle, we select the finest protein source available and present it to our people in a grand ceremony. You, Jack Sullivan, have been chosen for this." "Honor, chosen to be dinner, you mean?" Jack's voice was steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. "To nourish our entire civilization," Kazrak corrected, raising his massive cleaver. "Your sacrifice will sustain thousands." Jack looked around the hall, counting exits and evaluating his options. The crowd that had followed them inside was blocking the main entrance, and he could see more Vorthok filtering in by the minute. Running wasn't going to be an option, and fighting his way out against hundreds of aliens seemed like a losing proposition. But Jack Sullivan hadn't survived 2 tours in Afghanistan and 20 years in the competitive world of Texas barbecue by giving up when things got tough. He was a problem solver, and right now he had the biggest problem of his life to solve. "Hold on. There, Chief," Jack said, raising his hands in a peaceful gesture. "Before you start carving me up like a holiday turkey, I've got a proposition for you." Kazrak paused mid-swing, apparently not used to his ingredients talking back. "Specimens do not make propositions. This specimen does," Jack replied firmly. "You want to serve your people the best possible meal, right? I mean, this is your most sacred festival. Thousands of people are here expecting something special. The traditional preparation has served our people for generations," Ambassador Thelanara said carefully. "Traditional is fine," Jack acknowledged. "But wouldn't you rather serve them the absolute best version possible? I mean, you went to all the trouble of importing me from another planet. Seems like a waste to just hack me up with a big knife and throw me in a pot." Chief Executioner Kazrak's 4 eyes narrowed suspiciously. "What do you propose? Meat?" Jack took a deep breath and played the biggest gamble of his life. A competition. "You prepare me your traditional way, and I'll prepare myself using proper Earth techniques. Let your people judge which method produces superior results." The hall fell completely silent. Apparently, This wasn't how these ceremonies usually went. You wish to participate in your own preparation? Ambassador Thelanara asked, sounding genuinely confused. Not exactly, Jack said quickly. I propose we use substitute ingredients. You've got to have some kind of local livestock, right? We each prepare the same base protein using our respective methods, and your people decide which approach produces better results. Kazrak's scarred face contorted into what might have been a grin. And if your method fails, then you get to carve me up just like you planned, Jack said, with more confidence than he felt. But if my method wins, I become your head chef instead of your dinner. The crowd began murmuring among themselves, apparently intrigued by this unprecedented development. Jack could see Ambassador Thelanara conferring quietly with several other officials, their expressions suggesting this was far outside their normal procedures. This is highly irregular, the ambassador said finally. The best discoveries usually are, Jack replied. Look, you brought me here because you heard I was good at what I do. Give me a chance to prove it. What's the worst that could happen? Either you get a better meal than usual, or you get the same meal you were planning anyway. Chief Executioner Kazrak hefted his massive cleaver thoughtfully. The human speaks of technique. What technique could possibly surpass the traditional methods of Vorthok? Jack grinned and gestured toward his equipment cases. How about I show you what 20 years of professional meat preparation looks like? I guarantee you've never tasted anything like what I can produce. The silence stretched on for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Finally, Ambassador Thelanara nodded slowly. The Council will consider your proposal. Chief Executioner Kazrak, prepare both the traditional ingredients and the human substitute protein. We shall have our competition. As the aliens bustled around making preparations, Jack unpacked his equipment with steady hands despite the circumstances. His grandfather's knives gleamed under the strange lighting, and his spice collection seemed to glow like precious gems. He had one chance to cook for his life, and he intended to make it count. The next few hours would determine whether Jack Sullivan would become the galaxy's most famous chef or its most seasoned dinner. The Feast of Champions, the competition arena, had been transformed into something resembling a gladiatorial cooking show. Thousands of Vorthok citizens packed the massive hall, their pale faces gleaming with anticipation in the flickering light of the fire pits. Jack Sullivan stood at his makeshift cooking station, surrounded by his grandfather's knives and spice collection, while across the arena Chief Executioner Kazrak prepared his traditional implements of culinary destruction. Ambassador had assembled a panel of 5 judges, each one apparently representing a different aspect of Vorthok society. There was High Priest Vextar, whose multiple eyes glowed with religious fervor. Trademaster Quindle, whose calculating gaze suggested he understood the economic implications of this moment. General Morthers, a scarred warrior who looked like he'd eaten his enemies on more than one occasion. Scholar Lithana, whose delicate features suggested she approached food from an intellectual perspective. And finally, Queen Zelphius herself, the ruler of the Vorthok Collective, whose presence had apparently made this more than just a local festival. Citizens of Vorthok, Queen Zalphius announced, her voice carrying easily through the vast hall. Today we witness something unprecedented in our history. The specimen has requested to demonstrate alien preparation techniques before fulfilling its traditional role. Jack tried not to wince at being called a specimen, but he had bigger concerns at the moment. The substitute protein Kazrak had provided was unlike anything Jack had ever seen. The creature looked like someone had crossed a rhinoceros with a lobster, and given it anger management issues. It had been partially butchered, revealing meat that was deep purple in color, with a marbled pattern that reminded Jack of premium Wagyu beef. "Behold, the mighty Thakta," Kazrak announced, gesturing to his own specimen with obvious pride. Apex predator of the Vorthok Highlands, raised on a diet of pure aggression and crystallized rage. Crystallized rage, Jack muttered, examining his own portion of the beast. That's either the most pretentious marketing I've ever heard, or these people take their food very seriously. The meat itself told a story. The muscle fibers were dense and tightly wound, indicating a life of constant stress and activity. The marbling suggested good fat distribution, but Jack could see that improper preparation would result in something tougher than old boot leather. This was going to require everything he'd learned about breaking down difficult proteins. "The competition will proceed in 3 phases, Ambassador Thelanara announced. Preparation, cooking, and presentation. Each competitor will have 4 hours to complete their dish." For hours was tight, but Jack had worked with worse constraints. He began by studying the Thakta meat more carefully, using his smallest knife to make test cuts and evaluate the grain structure. The muscle fibers ran in complex patterns unlike anything from Earth, but the basic principles of meat preparation were universal. Find the grain, work against it, and use time and temperature to transform tough connective tissue into something tender and flavorful. Kazrak, meanwhile, had begun his traditional preparation with the subtlety of a demolition crew. He attacked the meat with his enormous cleaver, hacking away chunks with no apparent regard for technique or finesse. Each blow was accompanied by grunts of effort and sprays of purple blood that painted his leather apron in abstract patterns. Traditional Vorthok preparation focuses on the release of fear-based hormones. Scholar Lithana explained to the crowd. The trauma of butchering intensifies the flavor profile. Jack shook his head as he watched the carnage. That's not cooking. That's just making things suffer because you don't know any better. His first step was to properly break down the Thakta carcass. Using his grandfather's boning knife, Jack separated the different muscle groups with surgical precision. He identified what appeared to be the equivalent of a tenderloin, several roast-sized portions that looked like they'd benefit from slow cooking, and some smaller pieces that would work well for a quick sear. Note the alien's technique, General, Morthus observed, leaning forward with interest. He separates the flesh according to some pattern we do not understand. Every cut of meat has its own personality, Jack explained, knowing that education was part of his survival strategy. Some parts are naturally tender and cooked quickly. Others need time and patience to break down properly. You can't just treat everything the same way. Jack selected what appeared to be the toughest cut for his main preparation. If he could make the worst part of the animal taste incredible, it would prove his point better than anything else. He began by scoring the surface in a crosshatch pattern, breaking up the tight muscle fibers and creating more surface area for his spices to penetrate. His spice blend was a carefully calculated mixture of earth seasonings and local Vorthok herbs he'd identified during the journey. The foundation was salt and black pepper, but he'd added smoked paprika for color and depth, cumin for earthiness, and a Vorthok spice that tasted like garlic's more aggressive cousin. His secret weapon was a blend of enzymes from pineapple and papaya that would help break down the tough proteins from the inside out. "What is the purpose of this powder ritual?" High Priest Vextar asked, his multiple eyes tracking Jack's every movement. "Seasoning is about more than flavor," Jack replied. massaging the spice blend deep into the scored meat. These compounds will penetrate the muscle fibers and begin breaking down the proteins that make meat tough. It's science and art working together. Kazrak had finished his butchering and was now building what appeared to be a bonfire under a crude metal grate. The flames roared high and hot, completely uncontrolled, while he seasoned his meat with nothing but coarse salt and what looked like crushed bones. Fire hot, meat cook, Kazrak declared with obvious satisfaction. Traditional way is best way. Jack winced as he watched Kazrak throw his meat onto the grate over the roaring flames. The outside would char to leather before the inside even began to warm up. It was everything wrong with cooking compressed into a single catastrophic technique. Meanwhile, Jack was building his own fire with the patience of a master craftsman. He selected specific types of wood from the pile provided, choosing pieces that would burn clean and hot without producing bitter smoke. Using techniques learned from decades of barbecue competitions, he built a two-zone fire with intense heat on one side for searing and moderate heat on the other for gentle cooking. The alien builds his fire like he plans a campaign, General, Morthus observed approvingly. Strategic, controlled. Temperature control is everything, Jack agreed, using his portable thermometer to monitor different zones of his fire. You want high heat for developing flavor through the Maillard reaction, but moderate heat for breaking down connective tissue without destroying the meat. His cooking technique was a masterclass in protein preparation. First, he seared the seasoned meat over high heat, creating a beautiful crust that locked in juices and developed complex flavors. The Vorthok crowd gasped as the meat hit the grill with a satisfying sizzle, releasing aromatic smoke that seemed to hypnotize everyone within range. What sorcery is this? Trademaster Quindle whispered, his calculating eyes wide with amazement. Not sorcery, Jack replied, carefully monitoring the meat's internal temperature, just understanding how heat, time, and chemistry work together. After achieving the perfect sear, Jack moved the meat to the cooler side of his fire and covered it with a makeshift dome he'd fashioned from available materials. This created an oven effect that would cook the meat evenly while maintaining moisture. He added wood chips that had been soaking in a mixture of local fruit juices, creating aromatic smoke that would penetrate deep into the meat. The difference between the two cooking methods was immediately apparent. Kazrak's meat was charring, black on the outside while remaining raw on the inside, producing clouds of acrid smoke that made nearby spectators cough and retreat. Jack's preparation was developing a deep mahogany crust while cooking evenly throughout, releasing smoke that had the entire arena transfixed. The aromas, Scholar Lithana murmured, moving closer to Jack's station. I have never experienced anything like this. Jack smiled as he basted his meat with a glaze he'd prepared from local fruits and spices. Smell is a huge part of taste. If it doesn't smell incredible, it's not going to taste incredible either. As the cooking progressed, Jack provided a running commentary on his techniques, turning the competition into an impromptu masterclass in culinary science. He explained how different temperatures affected protein structure, why resting meat was crucial for juicy results, and how the combination of acid, salt, and heat could transform even the toughest cut into something transcendent. The Vorthok audience was completely captivated. Many were taking notes, and Jack noticed several of them sneaking closer to his station to better catch the aromatic smoke drifting from his grill. Even the judges were leaning forward with obvious interest, their usual stoic expressions replaced by something approaching wonder. When the 4 hours were finally up, The contrast between the two preparations was stark. Kazrak's meat looked like charcoal on the outside and raw flesh on the inside, sitting in a pool of its own blood and grease. Jack's creation was a thing of beauty, with a perfect mahogany crust that gleamed with rendered fat and aromatic glazes. "The judging will now commence," Queen Zalthius announced. The judges approached Kazrak's traditional preparation first, as protocol demanded. Each one cut off a piece of the charred bloody meat and placed it in their mouths with the solemnity of people performing a sacred duty. Their expressions remained carefully neutral, but Jack could see subtle signs of distress. Eyes watering, slight winces, the kind of diplomatic poker faces that suggested they were experiencing something between food poisoning and existential crisis. The traditional preparation maintains its authentic flavor profile, High Priest Vex announced carefully. The texture remains challengingly traditional, General Morthus added, his scarred face betraying nothing. Then they approached Jack's station, and everything changed. The first judge to taste Jack's preparation was Scholar Lithana, whose intellectual approach to food had made her seem like the most likely convert. She cut a piece of the perfectly cooked meat, studied it for a moment, then placed it in her mouth. Her reaction was immediate and dramatic. Her multiple eyes widened in shock, then rolled back in what could only be described as ecstasy. She made a sound that was part moan, part revelation, and entirely involuntary. The other judges stared at her in alarm as she continued to chew, with an expression of pure bliss. Scholar Lithana, Queen Zalthius asked with concern, "Are you experiencing some form of toxicity?" "This is," Lithana managed between rent chews, "the most extraordinary thing I have ever tasted. The texture is tender beyond comprehension, yet maintains perfect structural integrity. The flavor is complex, layered, with notes that build and evolve with each bite." The other judges exchanged glances, then approached Jack's preparation with obvious curiosity. One by one, they tasted the perfectly prepared thakta, and one by one, their expressions transformed from skeptical duty to amazed delight. Trade. Master Quindle's calculating demeanor cracked completely as flavor hit his palate. "This cannot be the same creature," he whispered. "This is transcendent." General Morthus, the scarred warrior who had probably eaten raw enemy flesh on campaign, actually closed his eyes in appreciation. "I have consumed the flesh of conquered foes across 17 star systems, but nothing has prepared me for this level of culinary mastery." High Priest Vexter was openly weeping tears of joy. The ancestors themselves could not have imagined such perfection. This is a religious experience. Finally, Queen Zalthius herself approached Jack's station. The entire arena fell silent as she cut a portion of the meat and raised it to her mouth. The pause stretched for what felt like eternity before she took her first bite. The Queen's reaction surpassed all the others. She actually staggered backward, her pale features flushing with color Jack hadn't known the Vorthok were capable of displaying. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a reverence usually reserved for ancient prophecies. "In all the cycles of our civilization, through all the sacred feasts and traditional preparations, we have never experienced anything approaching this level of culinary achievement. This human has not merely prepared food, he has created art." The crowd erupted in a sound that was part sheer, part religious awakening, and part primal hunger. Thousands of Vorthok voices rose in acclaim as they demanded to taste this miraculous preparation for themselves. Jack found himself surrounded by alien dignitaries, all talking at once and making increasingly elaborate offers. Queen Zalthius raised her hand for silence and addressed him directly. Jack Sullivan of Earth, you have proven that your species possesses culinary knowledge beyond our understanding. I hereby declare you the winner of this competition and offer you the position of Royal Chef of the Vorthok Collective. Royal Chef? Jack asked, still processing his sudden reversal of fortune. You will teach our people these techniques, the Queen continued. Transform our food culture. Bring this level of excellence to every meal consumed in our civilization. Jack looked around the arena at thousands of eager alien faces, then at his equipment and the perfectly prepared meal that had saved his life. Just 12 hours ago, he'd been a struggling butcher in Texas, facing bankruptcy and irrelevance. Now he was being offered the chance to revolutionize the cuisine of an entire galactic civilization. Your Majesty, Jack said with a grin that felt like it might split his face, you've got yourself a deal. 6 months later, Sullivan's Stellar Steakhouse had become the most successful restaurant chain in Vorthok space, with locations on 17 different planets. Jack had trained hundreds of alien chefs in proper cooking techniques, written the first comprehensive guide to interspecies cuisine preparation, and revolutionized food culture across 3 star systems. His story had spread throughout the galaxy as an example of human ingenuity and adaptability. When faced with becoming dinner, Jack Sullivan had instead become the most famous chef in known space, proving once again that humanity's greatest strength wasn't physical power or advanced technology, but the ability to find innovative solutions to impossible problems. And the best part, the Vorthok had released all their captured human specimens and hired them as restaurant staff, creating the first truly integrated interspecies food service empire in galactic history. It turned out that when you treated ingredients with respect and knowledge instead of fear and tradition, everyone benefited. Sometimes the best way to avoid being eaten by aliens was to teach them how to cook properly. Asterisk.